The scene opens this evening um, as Stefan, um, sitting at his workbench, puts the finishing touches on a sculpted ashtray that he had been making for his Nosferatu acquaintance. Hmm. Doesn't have the best finish whatsoever. Leaving it mostly where it is. Um, as he as he goes to make that one final finishing touch, he pulls back all of a sudden, and realizes that the shape, the texture, the feet that hold it or that allow it to set on a flat surface like a coffee table, the mask in the center, one half raised and black, the other half inset and filled with mother of pearl, a stark contrast between white and black. Um, when you ignore the other vibrant, shimmering colors that can appear in the pearl, um, he looks at himself pleased. It's not the best work that he's ever done, but it is, for what it is, a remarkable piece. He sets it aside. He begins to clean his workbench off, um, putting away tools that he had used for his previous project um, with haste. No less precise than any other time, but he wants to begin laying out the groundwork for his next project. Um, he sets out couple of basic implements, um, a cushioned velvet mat. He hasn't used it for quite some time. Um, he grabs a couple pairs of unpowdered rubber gloves, grips or uses that to grip the piece of crystal that he had selected last night for his new endeavor. Sets it gently on the velvet mat, and then sets um, two pairs of gloves out beside it, one pair to the right, one pair to the left. He opens up a drawer to his left, or a drawer to yeah, a drawer to his left in this workbench, and pulls out a small box of very, very fine tools. Again, something he hasn't used in a while, but he kept it in the same place, kept the same order to his work area that he always remembered, the order that always helped him before when he was mortal. Um, he begins laying out just a couple basic tools. One that he can use basically like a manual drill, a very, very fine implement, to produce a channel, maybe 1 to 2 millimeters into the crystal. This is very delicate work. He knows. He focuses his mind. He doesn't breathe. Not physically, but mentally, he feels himself breathe. Tries to remember what it felt like so long ago, and just examines the tool for a moment, eventually setting it in between the gloves and the mat. And he walks over to his other workbench, grabbing out another small box from the opposite drawer he had gotten the vial from. Doesn't have many of them, he knows, but that one was well worth it. This is generally where he keeps what most would consider first aid supplies, some limited chemicals. This is also where he does a lot of his chemistry work, given that this is the cleanest workbench and it is properly suited to the task. He begins to pull out a few basic chemicals. He checks to see how much, lightly flicking with his finger, how much anticoagulant he has. Not much, but more than enough for this project. He sets that aside. He sets some other rudimentary medical supplies and sets up, or gets ready to prepare, at least sets up for preparation, a few implements, a burner, some vials, maybe a beaker. Few things that he has, but no less valuable. And he pulls out what is, quite frankly, one of the most important to this type of endeavor, his journal. Once he's satisfied with what he set out, he checks before walking over to his bookshelf the order of things laid out on the two workbenches, each with a stool sitting in front of them. And he pulls out his journal from the little nook that he keeps it in, mostly out of sight. Only he would know where it is. And he turns to a particularly interesting page. One of the few recorded excerpts from that book. If only he could reacquire it. The steps, the leaps and bounds that he would be able to make in his craft with the full, or with knowledge of that book's full contents. The memory of the feel of the leather binding, the spine with its raised structure. Even the smell of the paper, the feel and the look of that paper, so old. You would think it would be utterly fragile, but no. That book has survived hundreds and hundreds of years. The page he turns to concerns something he hasn't used for a long time. His eyes and his body turns around, looking to where his sculpture sits. That grand work that he's so proud of, the one that he wants so badly to show. not since the eyes. That careful preparation took many, many months trying to keep them intact, trying to keep them from decomposing, breaking down. The careful work that he put into it. And this is a similar task. He turns the page to find the next excerpt, something called a blood gem. He doesn't have the whole of the information. He knows this. He couldn't translate the rest of it from the Latin. All he could glean was the German and the English, albeit old language. He was able to carefully discern it, giving his grounding, giving his knowledge. But the Latin is the one thing that eluded him. Just a few words thrown into the, carefully placed into the paragraph, but he believes he understands how to do this, how to make blood placed in an object very carefully that has had channels carved with an acid appropriate to the material, literally internally sculpting a structure with a liquid, a corrosive liquid, and then placing that blood carefully prepared into it to make it look as though it is actually flowing, actually circulating. He goes over some of the things that are required. A small amount of silver dust, or tiny, tiny flecks. No, dust. Dust, he agrees, for this work. A small amount of liquid that can, according to the text, though he doesn't know how it was possible then, keep any form of, or keep blood in its current state, to keep it from coagulating, to keep it from losing its qualities. The description is, or the passage describes the substance as a perfect suspender of liquid. Crude, but he understands with modern technology, modern knowledge, what they must have been using. And he takes a small bottle, one of the things he had set out, opening it carefully and removing the vial of kindred blood. Tremere blood. He smiles to himself. It took quite a while to actually persuade him, but everything worthwhile is something that takes time. And this indeed will take time to produce. He takes just the smallest drop, relieving the stopper off of the tube. Just places the tiniest drop of this anticoagulant into the kindred blood. He knows that it does not act the same way as as mortal blood. It does not congeal the same way. It does not congeal as rapidly as mortal blood, but he does this nonetheless because it is the first step required, especially given that it's going to take some time before he can actually place it into that small egg-shaped crystal vessel. He has to spend the time to actually do the sculpting. And once that tiny drop is placed, he quickly puts the eyedropper back into the bottle of anticoagulant, closes it, and puts the stopper at the same time back onto the tube, placing it into the small cabinet, a little more like a first aid box, I suppose, that he retrofitted. Walks over to his other workbench, checking his already carefully prepared supply of acid, which can be used to carve or erode anything from stone to anything with a crystalline structure. He sets it out. Begins thinking of where he could get one of the most crucial components for this: silver dust. And then he remembers the woman with whom he has a business agreement. He's already gotten some materials. Goes to thinking Sophia could help him. Sophia could get him what he needs to do this. Another Tremere assisting a lunatic, a madman, somebody who is less than grounded in what most people would refer to as sanity, assisting him in this great work. Begins to think what his sire would say. He sits down, or he kind of steps back and examines both of the workbenches carefully. To determine whether or not he has made the appropriate preparations. After all, if you don't double check your work, how do you know you're doing it right? Yes. He nods, smiles, realizing how great he has done just in the preparation process, and sits down at his sculpting bench, pushing the the velvet mat away, further in front of him, but away from him a little bit to give him some room. He takes out a smaller piece of the crystal, about the size of his thumb, the tip of his thumb anyway, from the first knuckle, from the tip. He takes it out and he grabs his tiny drill, and he begins to place it against the crystal, trying to measure the right point at the top. It roughly has the same shape, but it's not exact. But he needs a test, and he begins to drive it in by hand, very carefully, very precisely. Three successes. Yep. Two successes, I should say. He he knows that he's about there. The mark is correct, but one wrong move and that crystal could have shattered with what he was doing. More practice, he thinks. At least now he knows close to what he was doing wrong. He was trying to drill the hole by hand a little too quickly. Slower, more concise. And realizing, though, that a 2mm channel down into the center from the top will do. That will be an appropriate channel for his work, at least a starting point to allow the acid to do its work while he carefully maneuvers the crystal to sculpt it very carefully. He goes over and grabs a small, or he reaches over and grabs a small container of this acid, and setting everything down for a moment, grabs out of the drawer to his right some elbow-length rubber gloves, just in case something should spill. He doesn't want to get burned or have his skin corroded by this substance. He picks up the small piece of crystal, his test subject, and the small dropper of acid, carefully placing it into the channel, ready for the moment as soon as there's about a drop or two, to begin moving it into the shape that he knows to be a human heart. And just before he places the acid, he grabs out of his right drawer as well a couple pictures. And places one down. He found it from a magazine so many years ago, but it served him well. And he just places it in front of him so that he knows the shape, picks up the dropper bottle, and with 2 drops very quickly placed into the channel, very cleanly, he begins to move it in that shape as to let the acid carve a channel around. A similar channel the blood will actually be placed into and flow into, knowing that the acid will actually deteriorate as it carves. As soon as the acid is placed into the channel, it begins eating its way in. He lets it go just a little bit further into this smaller piece, and then he begins to move it very carefully to get it to go into the direction that he wishes, and then kind of slowly brings it around. Occasionally, very carefully, placing another 1 to 2 drops back into the channel and quickly letting it slide in and then shifting its position, getting that almost perfect human heart shape, bringing it back around. And with one more attempt at 2 more drops, he brings it around the opposite side to finish the circulatory channel in just the right shape, maneuvering it again from going from, instead of left to down, going right and away from him to bring it together and to let that channel form, finishing it off to let the last of the acid actually deteriorate and eat some of the crystalline structure. He brings it to the bottom and then quickly brings it up again to kind of form a like a bottom valve, so to speak. Not entirely accurate, but he had to do. Or no. He brings it around opposite of the first channel to create a second valve on the top of the heart shape, the human heart shape. So there's two valves at the top of the heart structure. And looking at the piece, he places that beside the first crystal that has been untouched, moves the velvet mat closer to him, looking at the two valves at the top of the heart shape, looking at the channel, referring back to the picture and comparing. He in his mind, as he looks at that picture and looks at what he has just created, he realizes that he can indeed do what he planned. He can indeed perform this this task, but he still has a long way to go. At the first success, his mind breaks into an almost celebration. He feels an overwhelming sense of happiness, of joy, of love and appreciation into what he has just started to create. He sits back on his bench, quickly swiveling with an almost youthful vigor, walking over to his sitting chair, and quickly, with a flick of two fingers, his stereo sound emanating from the speakers comes to as much life as he's showing, and he lets the sound spill out of the speakers a little bit louder than he usually does. He sits and in his head enjoys the grand festivity, the grand party, the joyous occasion at this first victory, this first completed task. It sits back and just takes a moment.